When I built this house, I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I didn't care about curb appeal, resale value, or whether the HOA president, Samantha Stewart, approved of my bunker-style walls from 200 feet away. I built it because I've seen what wind does when it's angry, and I had no intention of letting retirement end in a pile of splinters. So, when Hurricane Helena came roaring in off the Gulf like the end of the world, Bay Ridge Shores was crushed in a single night, roofs peeled off power lines, down streets underwater. And my place, not a broken window, not a single loose shingle. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, it was the beginning of something uglier. By the third day, while my generator hummed and I was handing out bottled water to shell-shocked neighbors, Samantha taped a letter to my gate demanding over $10 million and hinting I'd caused the damage by refusing to join her precious HOA. Before I tell you how I tore that nonsense apart, drop your location and local time in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens when an HOA Karen picks the wrong house to blame. 3 days after the storm, I walked out to check the mailbox, expecting maybe FEMA pamphlets or a power company notice. Instead, there it was, an envelope laminated against the damp stamped with the Bay Ridge Shores Homeowners Association seal. Inside, I found something so ridiculous it almost made me laugh. A formal invoice demanding $10, 347 0 inches community restoration costs. According to Samantha Stewart, my failure to cooperate with collective disaster protocols had led to disproportionate environmental impact. In plain English, my house survived, so apparently I was responsible for the ones that didn't. I read the thing 3 times trying to make sense of it until the absurdity sank in. They were blaming me for the hurricane. By that afternoon, local gossip was spinning faster than the storm itself. Someone had posted a drone photo of Bay Ridge Shores online, debris everywhere except for one square of untouched perfection. My house. The caption read, "Coincidence within hours, it had thousands of shares." People I didn't even know were accusing me of everything from using military technology to redirecting wind currents. It would have been funny if it hadn't turned into a witch hunt. A neighbor I'd pulled from floodwater now crossed the street to avoid me. Teenagers threw rocks at my gate. A local radio host called me the bunker guy who cheated nature. And through it all, Samantha smiled on the news, saying, "We're just seeking accountability for our devastated community." Accountability. That word burned. I scanned the HOA letter, sent it to my attorney, David Monroe, and waited. He called back 15 minutes later, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "Frank, that's not a lawsuit," he said between chuckles. "That's a nervous breakdown on letterhead." Still, his tone shifted when he added, "But if they're serious about this, you'd better get ready. HOAs don't like being embarrassed, and right now you're their humiliation poster boy." That night, I walked through the property with a flashlight, checking for any signs of trespassers. The woods were quiet except for the distant hum of generators and the soft hiss of receding tide. My bunker stood unshaken, smug in its defiance. But inside, I felt the pressure tightening, not from the storm, but from the people trying to rewrite what had just happened. The next morning, I found something else taped to my gate, a copy of the Bay Ridge Shores Community Charter with a new amendment proposal, mandatory inclusion of adjacent non-participating properties into the HOA for collective safety. Compliance. Translation: they were trying to annex my land again. I brewed a pot of black coffee, sat on the porch, and reread the document. Every word felt like déjà vu. They'd tried this before. Fake zoning forms, falsified parcel lines, and even a petition signed entirely by HOA board members using identical handwriting. I'd beaten them once. They were just hoping time had made me softer. I called David again. "They're doing it, aren't they?" I said. "They're pulling the same trick." He sighed. "Worse. This time, they've got a sob story. Disaster brings sympathy, Frank. And people don't think straight when they're grieving their homes." He was right. The HOA had turned pain into propaganda. By the end of the week, the local news aired a segment titled, "Why Did One Home Stand When Others Fell?" They showed footage of me hauling debris and handing out water bottles, and somehow made it look suspicious. Experts question whether the design of Mr. Bailey's structure could have unintentionally redirected wind shear toward neighboring properties, the anchor said with manufactured concern. Officials are investigating possible zoning irregularities. That line hit me harder than the storm itself. Investigating possible zoning irregularities. Samantha's fingerprints were all over it. 2 days later, I received an official summons. Not from FEMA, not from the parish, but from the HOA's attorney. A 40-page complaint accusing me of refusing to participate in communal mitigation, moral negligence, and my personal favorite, environmental imbalance due to selfish architectural foresight. Apparently, designing your house too well was now unethical. David's voice was calm but grim. They want a settlement. They'll drag your name through the mud until you pay something, anything to shut them up. Then I'll do the opposite, I said. I'll drag them through it instead. That weekend, I began digging through my storage shed, pulling out old blueprints, inspection certificates, FEMA permits, notarized plats, everything I'd kept since construction. Every signature, every date, every document. My father used to say paperwork is the only weapon polite society allows. I intended to sharpen it. I spent hours cross-checking records, highlighting inconsistencies. My land had been legally exempt from HOA jurisdiction for over 15 years, protected by a recorded covenant. Yet somehow the HOA's post-disaster updated boundary map now showed my property as part of Block C, their domain. Someone had doctored the parish survey again. That night, under the soft hum of my generator, I opened my laptop and began writing an affidavit of my own, a full timeline of every attempt the HOA had made to harass, annex, and intimidate me. I attached scanned copies of letters, screenshots of social media posts, and public statements Samantha had given to the press. By midnight, my inbox pinged with a new email. The sender was anonymous, just a burner address. The subject line read, "They forged more than maps." I hesitated, then clicked. Inside was a single PDF, Bay Ridge Shores Emergency Fund, Q3 allocation report. On the surface, it looked legitimate, but a quick check of Louisiana's insurance filings showed the policy numbers were completely fake. The HOA's disaster fund didn't exist. The next morning, I called David. "Looks like they've been pocketing the premiums," I said. He whistled low. "Now that's criminal. You sit tight, Frank. I'm coming over." When he arrived, we spread the documents across my kitchen table. His expression changed from amusement to something colder, professional, predatory. "This isn't about a grudge anymore," he said. "This is fraud. Wire fraud, insurance fraud, and probably conspiracy if we dig deep enough. We agreed to play it quiet, not go public yet, not until we had more proof." But the next few days brought new fuel to the fire. Local reporters began camping outside my gate. Drones buzzed overhead. Someone even spray-painted "Storm Thief" on my fence. Samantha appeared on TV again, standing in front of the HOA clubhouse, ruins crocodile, tears glistening as she said, "While most of us lost everything, one man stood untouched and refuses to share in our pain." That night, as I watched her performance, the power flickered. The generator kicked in instantly, humming steady as my heartbeat. I stared at the TV screen, at her painted face, at the lies dripping from her voice, and realized something. They weren't just trying to bankrupt me. They were trying to erase me. So I poured another cup of bourbon coffee, opened my laptop, and whispered to myself, "All right, Samantha, let's see how your perfect little kingdom holds up against the truth." By sunrise, I had already filed 3 counterclaims, uploaded 2 affidavits, and sent a preliminary evidence package to the Louisiana State Insurance Commission. The storm might have ended outside, but inside Bay Ridge Shores, a new one was about to begin. It started with whispers and glances. By the second week, it was open hostility. The same neighbors who'd once waved across the fence now slowed their cars just to glare. Some even filmed my property from the street, narrating like amateur reporters. "Look at that place. Not a scratch." One voice sneered in a viral TikTok clip. "He probably built it with FEMA money." Within days, my name, Frank Bailey, was trending in local Facebook groups. Someone posted a side-by-side satellite image of Bay Ridge Shores, my untouched house glowing red amid a field of destruction. The caption, "How convenient." I didn't answer the door anymore. Half the knocks were reporters. The other half were HOA members pretending to check on me. I'd seen that trick before. Samantha Stewart's polite smile always preceded a legal ambush. Still, it amazed me how quickly gratitude turned into suspicion. I had helped pull 2 families from the rubble, loaned my spare generator to an elderly couple, even hosted a temporary charging station in my yard. But good deeds fade fast when fear finds a scapegoat. The next escalation came in the form of a press release. The HOA claimed it had credible evidence that I had modified natural airflow during the storm using unauthorized architectural reinforcements. In plain English, my concrete walls had somehow redirected the wind. The story spread like wildfire. Local news anchors said it with a straight face, calling it the Bay Ridge anomaly. One headline read, "Did one man's house make the hurricane worse?" I wanted to laugh, but the more ridiculous it got, the more dangerous it became. Someone dumped garbage across my driveway. Another night, I found a dead fish nailed to my gate, a swampy little threat straight out of some backwoods mafia playbook. When I called the sheriff, he sighed and said, "Look, mister, Bailey folks are upset. Maybe lay low until things cool off. Lay low, I said. I didn't rob a bank. I just built better walls. That earned me a half-hearted chuckle and a promise to patrol the area. They never did. Meanwhile, David, my lawyer, had gone silent for 2 days, then showed up unannounced, his tie crooked, his eyes fierce. They filed the lawsuit, he said, dropping a thick binder on my kitchen table. For what I asked, he smirked. Existing too effectively. I flipped through the pages. Each accusation was crazier than the last non-compliance with community safety values, willful environmental isolation, psychological harm inflicted through comparative property resilience. That last one nearly made me spit out my coffee. They're saying your house traumatized them, David explained dryly. I rubbed my temples. You're kidding. I wish. Then he added quieter. But this isn't about money, Frank. They're trying to control the narrative. They lost everything, homes, authority, reputation, and now they need a villain. You're the perfect one. That was the moment I understood. Samantha Stewart didn't want restitution. She wanted revenge. The HOA's PR campaign was a masterpiece of manipulation. Samantha appeared on every news channel within driving distance. She cried during interviews, saying she'd lost her sense of community and that some people chose selfish isolation over collective safety. Her words were measured. Her eyes never blinked. She knew exactly what she was doing, painting herself as the grieving leader betrayed by the lone holdout. By week 3, I couldn't step into town without feeling eyes on me. The local hardware store owner who used to chat about solar panels now muttered, "Guess the storm missed you on purpose." I went home, turned on my security cameras, and poured bourbon straight into my coffee. They wanted me isolated. Fine, I'd play their game. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop, Bay Ridge Shores case file, Phase 1 retaliation. First, I gathered every HOA communication since the storm, emails, newsletters, Samantha's statements, even screenshots from their private Facebook group. Thankfully, someone had leaked access. I cataloged every time they mentioned me, every lie they printed. Second, I compiled construction records, proving my home's compliance with Louisiana's toughest hurricane standards. FEMA engineers had signed off twice. County inspectors had stamped every permit. I had proof, while Samantha had opinions printed on letterhead. Still, the court of public opinion was harsher than any judge. One evening, as I checked my perimeter cameras, I saw 2 teens spray painting Storm Devil on my fence. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand. They froze like raccoons in headlights. "You really think that'll hold up in court?" I asked. They bolted without answering. The next morning, I found my mailbox smashed flat. David wanted to push for a restraining order, but I told him no. "Let them dig their own grave," I said. "I'm just collecting evidence." What I didn't tell him was that I'd already started digging figuratively and literally. Behind my shed, buried under a tarp, were boxes of old files, property deeds, land surveys, even audio recordings from my first battle with the HOA back in 2018. Samantha had been vice president then. I remembered her exact words during a friendly meeting. "We'll get you annexed one way or another, Mr. Bailey. Nobody lives outside the HOA forever." I'd kept the recording out of spite. Now it was gold. By day, I stayed quiet. By night, I built a digital arsenal. I scanned documents, encrypted folders, and backed everything to a cold drive hidden under the floorboards. Then came the first real crack in their wall. An anonymous email appeared in my inbox. Subject: "She's lying to them too." Attached were internal HOA spreadsheets showing where the community's disaster fund money had gone. Each line item looked legitimate until you saw the recipient accounts. Offshore transfers, shell corporations, a Cayman Islands P.O. box linked to S. Stewart Holdings, LLC. I stared at the screen for a long time, then forwarded it to David with 2 words. "Game on." He called within minutes. "If this checks out, we're not just defending you, we're taking them down." The next few days blurred into a quiet storm of preparation. David built a timeline. I gathered visual evidence. We even hired a forensic accountant, a soft-spoken man named Howard Chen, who could track money through smoke and mirrors. Within 48 hours, Howard confirmed it. Samantha had funneled nearly $2.6 million in fake insurance premiums into her personal investments months before Hurricane Helena even formed. I felt a grim satisfaction rising in my chest. They'd accused me of cheating nature. Turns out they were the ones robbing their own neighbors. But truth alone wasn't enough. We needed timing. David grinned across the table. "They've already filed suit. That means discovery works both ways. Once we're in court, they can't hide this anymore. And if the judge throws it out," I asked. He shrugged. "Then we go public. Either way, Samantha's empire burns. That night, as the rain returned in gentle sheets, I stood by the window watching the floodlights cast long shadows across my lawn. My reflection in the glass looked older, harder. I hadn't wanted a war. But after what they'd done, after the lies, the slander, the threats, I realized something vital. The storm wasn't the enemy. The HOA was. When lightning flashed over Bay Ridge shores, I whispered to the darkness, "You picked the wrong survivor, Samantha." The first time I realized just how deep this rabbit hole went, it wasn't from a lawyer or a judge, it was from a scared man who didn't want to be seen. It was late afternoon, the sky still swollen from afterstorm humidity, when a dusty pickup rolled up to my gate. Out stepped a man in a faded windbreaker, clutching a folder like it was radioactive. He glanced around nervously before speaking. "You don't know me, Mr. Bailey," he said. "Name's Carl Benson. I used to do accounting for the Bay Ridge Shores HOA. I quit 3 months before the storm." He looked tired, like a man who'd been living with too many secrets and not enough sleep. "I think you should see this," he said, handing me the folder. Inside were photocopies of ledgers, wire receipts, and internal memos. HOA storm insurance payments listed as premium fees were being routed through a fake insurer, Sunland Mutual Assurance, registered to a P.O. box in Belize. Every payment ultimately funneled into a bank account belonging to Samantha Stewart. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the papers while Carl kept talking faster now, like he needed to get it all out before courage ran out. She told us it was just temporary, that the funds were being moved for investment yield. But after the hurricane hit, she told me to shred the backups. I didn't. I kept copies. He looked over his shoulder again, lowering his voice. "They're going to come after you harder, Mr. Bailey. You embarrassed her on TV. You're the only one she can't control." Then he added, almost whispering, "You weren't just a neighbor to her. You were the example she wanted to destroy." Before I could respond, Carl was gone, driving off down the dirt road like a man escaping his own conscience. I called David immediately. "You better come over," I said. "We've got fuel for the fire." By the time he arrived, I had everything laid out across my kitchen table like a crime board: receipts, charts, post-it notes, connecting names, dates, and shell companies. David's eyes gleamed behind his glasses. "Well," he said slowly, "looks like our HOA president's been busy laundering her neighbor's hope." He flipped through a few pages, smirking. "You realize this is enough to blow their case to pieces?" I nodded. "Good. Let's hand her the shovel." But David wasn't smiling anymore. "Frank, this is bigger than a counterclaim. This is criminal. Fraud, racketeering, probably conspiracy to falsify insurance documentation. We need to be careful. People like her, when cornered, they bite." He was right. The next day, a black SUV idled outside my property for hours. No plates, no driver visible, just sitting there. When I walked toward it, it rolled away, slow tires whispering against gravel. That evening, I checked my security feed and noticed 2 cameras offline cut cables. Someone had been inside the fence. They wanted to rattle me. Instead, they reminded me why I built this house in the first place, for storms, natural or man-made. I spent the next night awake in my shed lights off a thermos of coffee and my shotgun beside me. Somewhere around 2 a.m. I heard the crunch of gravel near the gate. Footsteps. Then silence. When I flicked on the floodlight, the yard lit up like a stage. No one there, just a single envelope hanging from the mailbox. Inside was a USB drive. No note, no label. For a long time, I just stared at it, wondering if this was bait. Finally, I booted up my old offline laptop and plugged it in. There were dozens of files, PDFs, meeting transcripts, emails, one folder labeled Phase 3 Consolidation Plan. Reading through it, my jaw clenched tighter with every page. It wasn't just about me. The entire document detailed a systematic plan to force out non-compliant homeowners by using zoning pressure, moral leverage, and financial exhaustion. The goal: absorb adjacent land to expand HOA-controlled property, effectively turning Bay Ridge Shores into a privatized real estate empire. And at the very top of the org chart, Samantha Stewart, project director. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was proof. I called David first thing that morning. "Get your coffee ready," I said. "We've got a storm file of our own." By noon, we'd assembled an evidence package thicker than a phone book. David, ever the tactician, divided it into 3 folders. Folder A, fraud and insurance violations. Folder B, annexation and zoning manipulation. Folder C, personal harassment and defamation. He grinned when we finished labeling them. "We're not just defending you anymore, Frank. We're prosecuting them." The plan was simple: file a motion to dismiss their civil suit while simultaneously submitting our findings to the Louisiana Department of Insurance and the Parish Ethics Commission. If they wanted a courtroom, they'd get one, but this time as defendants. That evening, as we went through the chain of evidence, a second knock came at the door. Not law enforcement this time, not reporters. Just another weary face from the neighborhood. He was in his 50 seconds gray stubble HOA polo shirt, half torn. "My name's Tom Weaver," he said quietly. "I was the HOA treasurer until last week." David and I exchanged a glance. Tom stepped inside and set a flash drive on the table. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "You're not the only one they tried to ruin." After the hurricane, Samantha told us to redirect the remaining emergency funds to a reconstruction committee. It was a shell company. Her shell company. He looked around my bunker-style living room, eyes scanning the reinforced windows, the steel door frames. "You built this place to survive nature. She built hers to survive accountability." He told us everything, the fake invoices, the kickbacks, even the pressure to frame me as the scapegoat. She said if we could prove your house was the problem, FEMA would help pay for repairs. It was never about truth. It was about money. David sat back, stunned. "You're willing to testify?" Tom nodded. "Yeah. Just make sure people know I tried to fix it." When he left, I walked him to the gate. He hesitated before turning to me. "She's not going down quietly," he said. "You've got no idea who she's connected to." I smiled faintly. "Maybe she doesn't either." For the next week, David worked the phones like a war general. We submitted evidence to state investigators, filed a counterclaim for defamation and harassment, and notified the court of new criminal findings. Then we waited. Waiting is the hardest part of any fight, especially when your enemy controls the narrative. The HOA's social media page accused me of cyber harassment and coordinated misinformation. They even claimed the leaked emails were AI fakes. But once the Street Bernard Parish Tribune got wind of the story, things changed fast. The headline hit like thunder: HOA president under investigation for fraud, whistleblowers allege $2, 6M vanished before storm. The online comments were instant chaos. Some defended Samantha. Others turned on her completely. One post read, "We trusted her with everything, now she's blaming the only man who did it right." I printed that one and taped it on my fridge. By the weekend, parish investigators had officially opened an inquiry. The HOA's assets were frozen pending audit. Samantha's lawyer filed for delay, classic stalling tactic. But even the press smelled blood now. Reporters swarmed the gates again. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. David handled the statements. He had that calm, confident smirk that made cameras lean closer. My client's only crime, he said, was being more prepared than the people who tried to control him. That night, I sat on my porch, bourbon in hand, as thunder rolled far off over the Gulf. The air tasted like salt and justice. For the first time since the storm, I felt something close to peace. I'd been accused of manipulating the weather, but the real hurricane was just starting to tear through the people who tried to destroy me. As lightning flashed across the dark horizon, I smiled and muttered to the night, "Your move, Samantha." The morning after the article hit, my property felt quieter than usual, too quiet. No cars idled near the fence, no drones hovered overhead. For the first time in weeks, Bay Ridge Shores seemed to hold its breath. That's when I knew Samantha Stewart wasn't retreating, she was recalculating. David always said predators go silent before they strike again. I believed him, but I didn't expect her next move to arrive at my doorstep disguised as a confession. It was near dusk when I heard a knock, 3 short taps, like someone too nervous to commit to a full knock. I opened the door to find a man standing there, middle-aged, rain dripping off his baseball cap. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Bailey," he asked. His voice was hoarse, anxious. "I'm Thomas Briggs. I used to be the HOA's treasurer." That name made my stomach tighten. David had mentioned it once during our investigation, an uncooperative witness who'd vanished right after the audits began. "Used to be?" I asked, stepping aside. He nodded and entered cautiously, glancing around my concrete bunker as if expecting Samantha herself to burst through the window. He held a small black flash drive between his fingers like a weapon. "I shouldn't be here," he said, "but I can't keep living with it. You were right, they forged everything." I gestured for him to sit. He didn't. His hands trembled as he set the flash drive on the table. Samantha told us the money transfers were insurance reimbursements, but it was all a front. Offshore accounts, crypto wallets, even false FEMA grants. I signed some of the paperwork myself under her direction. He swallowed hard, his voice cracking. She said it was just bookkeeping. Then after the storm, she told us to delete every trace of the transfers. When I hesitated, she reminded me I'd already signed everything. Said if the feds came knocking, she'd tell them it was all my idea. I poured him a glass of water. You've got proof. He nodded toward the drive. Emails, meeting recordings, wire confirmations. You'll want to see the one from last July, she called it, Phase 3 consolidation. She planned to take over every property that didn't conform to her HOA's standards, starting with yours. I leaned back, exhaling. I'd seen those words before from the anonymous USB weeks earlier. You're saying that plan was real, Thomas gave a bitter laugh. Real enough that she paid a zoning official to redraw the county boundary. Your land was labeled annexation eligible in their internal reports. David's warning echoed in my head. They bite when cornered. She's not just a fraud, Frank Thomas said quietly. She's dangerous. He stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans. I can't stay here long. I've already been followed twice this week, but I needed someone to know before I disappear. I asked him one last question as he reached for the door. Why tell me now? He hesitated. His eyes looked hollow but resolute. Because you were the only one who didn't join her. You proved we could say no, and that scared her more than any storm. Then he was gone, driving off into the humid night, leaving the faint scent of rain and guilt behind him. I called David immediately. He arrived within an hour, still wearing his tie from court. We loaded the flash drive into my laptop. What we found wasn't just incriminating, it was explosive. There were internal audio clips, meeting notes, and email threads between Samantha and board members discussing leverage strategies. She called them moral conditioning tools, ways to manipulate residents into compliance after disasters. But one line stood out more than the rest. In a recorded meeting dated August 10th, 2 weeks before the hurricane, Samantha said, "If we can't control outliers like Bailey, we'll make them the enemy. Public shame is cheaper than litigation." David froze, eyes widening. She admitted intent. That's malicious prosecution. This recording could nuke their entire legal defense. Then we found another folder labeled H Project Emergency Plan. Inside drafts of the very lawsuit they eventually filed against me, complete with Samantha's handwritten notes in the margins. Blame structure, deflection of impact, collective damages, narrative, avoid insurance questions, focus on morality. If he resists, use media pressure. She hadn't just reacted after the hurricane. She'd planned my destruction months in advance. I stared at the screen, fists clenched. She built her empire on lies, and when the wind blew it down, she tried to make me the scapegoat. David grinned like a man smelling blood. Then let's give her the storm she asked for. The next morning, we filed a motion to expand our counterclaim. It wasn't just about defamation anymore. It was racketeering, fraudulent misrepresentation, malicious prosecution, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. The judge approved a discovery hearing within the week. But Samantha wasn't the kind of person to wait quietly for judgment. That same evening, a news leak surfaced. A local paper published excerpts from a supposedly confidential HOA report, accusing me of possible tampering with municipal power lines. They were accusing me of sabotaging the neighborhood's electricity during the storm. David nearly broke his pen when he read it. They're doubling down. She's using the same smear tactic, just new lies. I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. Good. The louder she gets, the more desperate she looks. What she didn't know was that the investigation had already shifted. Parish officials were subpoenaing HOA bank records, and according to David's contact inside the state insurance office, Samantha's name was now officially under review for federal fraud. For a few nights, I could almost feel her unraveling like distant thunder building behind calm skies. A few days later, another letter arrived. But this one wasn't from Samantha, it was from Thomas Briggs. Inside was a single line, handwritten in ink. "They know I talked to you. I'm leaving the state. Use the evidence. Don't let her bury it." There was no return address. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it inside the same file labeled Phase 3. That night, I sat outside under the faint hum of my generator. The crickets were louder than usual, the air thick with the smell of pine and distant saltwater. I thought about Thomas, how guilt had driven him to betray his own boss, how courage sometimes came too late. Then my security monitor beeped. A vehicle had pulled up near the property line. It wasn't the sheriff. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a black sedan with tinted windows, headlights off. I didn't move. Just watched through the infrared camera as a figure stepped out, stood still for nearly a minute, then got back in and drove away. No note this time. No envelope. Just a message, "We're still watching." The next morning, I walked the property and found something wedged under the fence, post an old HOA brochure. On it, someone had written in red marker, "You should have joined when you had the chance." I tore it in half and burned it right there in the fire pit. When I called David, he didn't even sound surprised. She's scared, he said. When people like Samantha lose control, they lash out. But the law is closing in. He was right. Later that week, the parish DA officially opened a criminal case. Investigators raided the HOA's temporary office, seizing hard drives and financial records. Word spread fast. Samantha had gone into hiding. But before she vanished, she sent one last email to every homeowner. Don't be fooled by Bailey's lies. He's the reason we've lost everything. The reply chain underneath told the real story, angry, betrayed neighbors finally turning on her. You stole from us. You lied. You let us drown. It was over. She just didn't know it yet. That night I poured 2 glasses of bourbon in my shed, one for me, one for the ghost of Thomas Briggs. I looked at the laminated injunction order still hanging on the wall from years back, the one that said the HOA had no legal authority over my land. And beneath it I pinned the newest letter, the subpoena notice for Samantha Stewart's financial records. The sound of justice in paper form. I raised my glass to the empty room and whispered, "You started this storm, Samantha. Now you get to drown in it." Outside thunder rolled again. But this time it didn't scare me. I'd already survived worse. Courtrooms smell like bleach, fear, and paperwork. The kind of place where people try to look righteous while secretly praying their lies sound rehearsed enough. I'd been in my share of hearings over the years, pilot disputes, zoning nonsense, but never anything like this. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was an execution, and the HOA had built the gallows for themselves. David and I walked in through the side door. He looked like a man going into battle, sharp suit, calm eyes, and the faint grin of someone holding a royal flush. I wore what I always did, clean jeans, a button-up, and the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. The room was packed. Every surviving resident of Bay Ridge Shores had shown up, curiosity and resentment mixing like gasoline and spark. 3 HOA attorneys sat at the plaintiff's table in identical navy suits, whispering like synchronized snakes. And behind them, Samantha Stewart finally unmasked in person. She didn't look like the poised community leader from the news anymore. Her makeup was gone, her hair hastily tied back, her eyes sharp and jittery. When she spotted me, she smiled, a brittle, venomous thing that said, "You don't belong here." The judge, an older woman named Judge Harris, gave the gavel a single, tired knock. This hearing she began is to determine whether Bay Ridge Shores HOA has standing to pursue damages against Mr. Bailey and whether counterclaims regarding harassment, defamation, and fraudulent activity shall proceed. David rose smoothly. Your Honor, we'll be brief. The plaintiff's entire case is built on fiction. We intend to prove not only that Mr. Bailey had no legal obligation to this HOA, but that the association itself engaged in deliberate financial fraud and media defamation to conceal embezzlement. He motioned to the clerk, who wheeled in a cart stacked with binders and sealed envelopes. Exhibit A through G, Your Honor. The HOA's lead attorney, a younger man trying too hard to sound authoritative, stood up and cleared his throat. Objection: preliminary exhibits have not been authenticated. They've been pre-cleared by discovery order. David cut him off. You might recall signing it. A ripple of laughter swept through the gallery. Even the judge's lips twitched. David took a breath and started the story from the beginning. Calm, deliberate, devastating. He walked the court through the timeline. The hurricane, the absurd $10 million invoice, the forged boundary maps, and the online smear campaign, accusing me of deflecting a Category 5 storm with structural selfishness. Then came the turning point. He opened a folder and held up a printed email. Exhibit D, internal correspondence between Samantha Stewart and former HOA treasurer Thomas Briggs, dated August 10th, 2 weeks before the storm. The subject line reads, Containment Strategy for Outlier Properties. He read aloud, If Bailey's home survives, we frame it as non-participation negligence. Public pressure will force compliance. Morality over legality always wins in optics. Gasps filled the courtroom. Samantha's lawyers whispered frantically. Judge Harris leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Is this email authenticated, verified through metadata, and corroborated by Mr. Briggs's deposition? David replied. The same deposition where he confessed to signing falsified insurance certificates under Miss Stewart's direction. He let that hang in the air before sliding another folder onto the table. Exhibit E, bank records showing $2.6 million in HOA insurance funds diverted to an offshore account, S. Stewart Holdings, LLC. The audience murmured louder. One of the HOA members in the back actually stood up and shouted, You stole from us, before being silenced by the bailiff. Samantha's lawyers scrambled to respond. The lead one rose, sweating through his collar. Your Honor, we dispute the relevance of these claims. Judge Harris cut him off. Counselor, your client's financial integrity is the foundation of this case. If these documents are genuine, they are absolutely relevant. Continue, Mr. Monroe. David's grin widened slightly. He picked up one last piece of evidence, a small USB drive. And finally, Your Honor, we have an audio recording obtained via anonymous whistleblower. It contains Miss Stewart's own voice discussing strategy for post-storm litigation. Samantha's lawyer shouted, "Objection! Illegally obtained Louisiana is a one-party consent state," David said flatly, "and the chain of custody has been verified." The judge nodded. "Play it." The courtroom went silent except for the hum of the speakers. Then her voice filled the air, clear, proud, unmistakable. "I don't care if the whole bay floods. If my house sells first, the rest can rot. And as for Bailey, let the wind do the heavy lifting. When it's done, we'll bury him in paperwork, and the press will eat him alive." The silence that followed was nuclear. A few people audibly gasped. Someone cursed under their breath. Samantha went pale. Her attorneys looked like they wanted to evaporate. David waited a beat before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, this is not the voice of a community servant. This is the voice of someone orchestrating fraud and harassment for profit." Judge Harris leaned back, staring directly at Samantha. "Miss Stewart, do you deny the authenticity of this recording?" Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she shook her head slightly, eyes glistening. It was taken out of context. David raised an eyebrow. "Of course it was." The judge sighed, scribbled something on her pad, and finally spoke. "The court finds that Bay Ridge Shores HOA has no standing to pursue damages against Mr. Bailey, having violated prior injunctions, fabricated claims, and engaged in harassment. Furthermore, the defendant's counterclaims for defamation, emotional distress, and fraud will proceed to trial." A murmur spread like wildfire through the gallery. The gavel hit once sharp and final. Court adjourned. Outside reporters swarmed us like gnats. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. "Mr. Bailey, how does it feel to win the preliminary hearing? Do you believe the HOA will face criminal charges? Is it true you built your house to survive nuclear fallout?" David handled them with a lawyer's finesse. "No comment on pending litigation," he repeated like a mantra. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, letting the flashbulbs strobe against my calm expression. But when we reached the courthouse steps, I couldn't resist turning back. Samantha was emerging behind her attorneys, flanked by parish deputies. Her face was white with fury, a storm contained only by handcuffs of humiliation. I met her eyes across the crowd. For a moment, everything went quiet. No reporters, no noise, just two people who'd survived the same hurricane, but lived through entirely different kinds of destruction. She mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I read the words easily. "This isn't over." I smiled, small and deliberate. "It is for you." Later that evening, David and I sat in my kitchen, the table cluttered with takeout containers and victory paperwork. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, slid one toward me. "You realize this isn't just a win," he said. "This is precedent. Every HOA lawyer in Louisiana is about to have nightmares about you." "Good," I said, clinking my glass to his. "Maybe they'll finally build something useful like ethics." He laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. For the first time in months, I let myself relax. The storm outside had long passed, but this was the calm that mattered. Before leaving, David looked back at the framed injunction on my wall, the same one from years ago that had started it all. "You ever think about selling this place?" After everything, I shook my head. "You don't sell freedom, David. You defend it." He smiled, tired but proud. "Then you just did." When he left, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky was orange and gold, quiet waves licking the distant shoreline. The same neighborhood that once tried to destroy me was now learning what accountability sounded like. As the last of the sun dipped below the water, I whispered into the breeze, "Storm's end." But truth always rebuilds. And somewhere far behind me, a gavel was still echoing. For a few days after the hearing, Bay Ridge Shores was a ghost town. The manicured lawns that once hosted HOA barbecues were overgrown and silent, the mailbox flags all hanging limp like white flags of surrender. Even the local gossip Facebook page had gone dark, either shut down or seized by investigators. But calm like that doesn't last. Not when there's still blood in the water. By midweek, the news cycle had exploded. HOA president accused of fraud and embezzlement blared across Louisiana headlines. One network even called it the storm after the storm. Cameras parked outside Samantha's suburban rental home. News vans lined the parish courthouse. Her carefully curated image pastel blazers, charity events, Sunday smiles crumbled overnight. David called early the next morning, voice almost gleeful. "She's running scared," he said. The DA's office just confirmed a joint state-federal probe. Wire fraud, conspiracy, misuse of disaster funds, it's all on the table. I sipped my coffee on the porch watching a squirrel dart across the fence. They found her offshore accounts. They found 3. And a condo in Denver she bought under her sister's name, paid in full the week before the hurricane hit. That made me laugh bitterly. So she saw the storm coming and cashed out early. Exactly. And she didn't warn anyone else. The story caught fire faster than Samantha's lawyer could smother it. Within 2 days, the New Orleans Chronicle ran an investigative expose, The Queen of Bay Ridge, How an HOA Empire Was Built on Lies. It detailed everything David and I had uncovered, the fake insurance policies, the falsified zoning maps, even the consolidation plan to seize adjacent private lands. There was a photo of me standing by my fence, arms crossed, the caption reading, "The lone holdout who fought back." I hadn't agreed to that interview, but I didn't mind. The truth was out, and it was louder than Samantha's lies ever were. By Friday, the DA's office held a press conference. The lead investigator, a stout woman named Karen Lewis, ironically stepped up to the microphone. "We can confirm that preliminary evidence indicates extensive financial misconduct within the Bay Ridge Shores Homeowners Association," she said. "We are pursuing charges against multiple individuals, including Miss Samantha Stewart." That was the moment it became real, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been bullied by that woman in heels with a clipboard. 2 days later, she was arrested. It happened quietly, no sirens, no spectacle. Just 2 unmarked cars pulling up outside her gated rental house in Baton Rouge. She'd been staying there under her sister's name, probably thinking she could wait it out until the storm of publicity died down. But this time, the real storm came for her. The mugshot hit the internet within hours. Samantha Stewart, age 47, charged with wire, fraud, conspiracy, and misappropriation of disaster funds. She still tried to look composed, but the camera doesn't lie, her smile was gone. I found out from David while replacing a section of fencing blown down in the last squall. He texted me a photo of the news headline with 3 words, "She's officially done." For a moment, I didn't feel triumph. Just quiet relief, like finally exhaling after holding my breath for months. The fallout was catastrophic for Bay Ridge Shores. 18 homeowners, the same people who once accused me of moral negligence, filed civil suits against Samantha personally. They demanded restitution for the stolen insurance premiums. Several HOA board members resigned under threat of indictment. The once proud neighborhood became a legal wasteland. Foreclosures, liens, for sale signs lined the streets like tombstones of pride. The county stepped in to dissolve the HOA officially. The final notice arrived in a plain white envelope stamped with the parish seal, Bay Ridge Shores Homeowners Association corporate entity, terminated by order of court. It was anticlimactic. No ceremony, no apology. Just a bureaucratic obituary for an empire built on control. I tacked the letter next to the framed injunction on my wall, the same one that had once forbidden them from touching my land. They'd violated it anyway, and it cost them everything. A week later, David stopped by unannounced, a grin plastered across his face. He held up a check envelope. "The settlement came through," he said. I opened it and blinked. $2 million and change. Damages, restitution, legal fees, all wired directly from what remained of the HOA's escrow account liquidated by court order. David chuckled, pouring himself a cup of my terrible coffee. "Guess you could finally buy that fishing boat." I smirked. "Or a taller fence." We both laughed. Then he grew serious. "You know, Frank, what you did here, it's more than a personal win. You set a precedent. Every HOA lawyer in this state's rewriting their bylaws right now, making damn sure they never pull a Samantha Stewart." I leaned back in my chair. "Good. Maybe next time they'll stick to picking paint colors and stop trying to play God." But despite the victory, the weight of everything lingered. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. The families I'd once helped during the storm avoided eye contact at the gas station. Shamed as that, it doesn't let people say I'm sorry even when they mean it. Still, not everyone hid. One afternoon, I heard tires crunching up my driveway. A familiar nervous face stepped out, Tom Weaver, the former treasurer who'd turned whistleblower. He looked healthier now, less haunted. He handed me a small wooden box burned around the edges. "I found this in the old HOA office, after the county seized it," he said. "It's the original charter, signed by the first homeowners back in 1996. Thought you might want it?" I opened it. Inside were faded papers brittle from humidity. Names, signatures, and one line printed in perfect irony. "To create a better community built on trust and shared values." Tom looked down. "Guess we lost that somewhere along the way." I nodded. "Greed does that. You can't build community on control. He smiled faintly. You're a better man than I gave you credit for. No, I said. I just had thicker walls. When he left, I burned the charter in my fire pit, watching the ashes swirl up into the humid dusk. That night, my phone buzzed again, another journalist, another interview request. I ignored it like all the others. I wasn't interested in being a headline anymore. I sat on the porch, bourbon glass sweating in my hand, listening to the frogs sing from the bayou. The wind that once carried destruction now felt like peace. Sometimes I thought about Samantha, not with anger, but with something closer to pity. She'd built her life on rules, fines, and fear, mistaking control for power. And when the real storm came, she learned what every control freak eventually does. The world doesn't ask for permission to change. The next morning, I installed a new sign at the gate. Heavy steel laser-cut letters, private property. Not a member of any HOA trespassers will be photographed, reported, and publicly mocked. The last part was a joke, mostly. A few neighbors drove by that day. One or two honked their horns, maybe out of apology. I waved back. The world had turned right side up again, and for the first time in a long while I felt like I could breathe. When David called that evening to toast the end of an era, I told him the truth. It's not the end, I said. It's just a warning. Some people build for beauty, others build for survival, but me, I built for storms. He laughed, and you outlasted every one of them. As I hung up, the sky glowed with the orange of another Louisiana sunset. The wind whispered through the cypress trees, gentle but firm, as if nature herself was nodding in approval. I raised my glass toward the fading light. Here's to the next storm, I said softly, and to being ready when it comes. And somewhere out there, far beyond the ruined subdivision, the echo of justice rolled like distant thunder. When the official letter arrived, it didn't come in a gold seal or with any ceremony. It was plain white paper folded twice, stamped with the parish insignia. The heading read simply, Notice of Dissolution, Bay Ridge Shores Homeowners Association Incorporated. After years of legal warfare headlines and hostility, that single line ended everything. No press conferences, no apologies, just bureaucratic death by ink. I sat at the kitchen table reading it twice. Then I laughed. It wasn't a triumphant laugh. It was the sound of disbelief. How something so monstrous could die so quietly. When I walked outside, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. The once perfectly planned community was now a patchwork of decay and humility. The welcome sign, a proud HOA community, had been spray-painted with one word in red wass. Most of the homes stood empty. Some families had moved out to escape the chaos, others foreclosed under the weight of legal fees and unpaid assessments. A few holdouts stayed living in half-repaired shells, too proud or too broke to leave. And yet the silence felt cleaner than it ever had. 2 weeks later, county trucks rolled into Bay Ridge Shores like pallbearers. They backed up to the old HOA Community Center, a beige building that used to host Samantha Stewart's mandatory community meetings. Now officials in white gloves carried out boxes of records, hard drives, and file cabinets wrapped in evidence tape. Cameras from the local news station captured every minute. I watched from my property line, coffee mug in hand. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same board members who once fined me for unsightly yard clutter had their own files dragged out like garbage. When one of the county officers noticed me, he lifted a hand. "Mr. Bailey," he called, "you might want to keep your mailbox locked. You're going to get a lot of letters. Reporters, maybe lawyers, maybe folks wanting to thank you." "Thanks," I said, "but I'm not looking for fans." He grinned. "You might not have a choice." That night, the Bayou Gazette published a front-page article titled, "The Fall of Bay Ridge Shores, How One Man's Refusal Exposed the System." They called me the last independent. The story detailed everything, the fake insurance, the illegal annexation Samantha's offshore accounts, and even the viral video of her courtroom breakdown. Apparently, someone in the gallery had filmed the moment her voice cracked under the weight of her own recording. The piece ended with a quote from David: "He didn't build a fortress. He built proof that freedom still has foundations." I clipped that line out of the paper and stuck it on my fridge. Not for pride, just as a reminder of how far a little stubbornness could go when backed by truth and concrete walls. But the aftermath wasn't all clean. A few days later, a group of former HOA members drove up my road, 2 women and a man in a pickup full of busted yard signs. They parked at the edge of my property and waved awkwardly. I didn't invite them in. I just leaned against my fence and waited. The man, probably mid-40 seconds, cleared his throat. "Mr. Bailey, we wanted to say sorry. For everything. We believed her. We thought you were the reason the insurance didn't come through." I nodded silent. The younger woman stepped forward, clutching a soggy binder. She made us feel like we were protecting our homes. We didn't realize we were just protecting her. Her voice cracked. I could tell she'd lost more than money, probably her sense of trust. I said what I'd been holding in for months. You didn't fail because you trusted her. You failed because you stopped trusting yourselves. They stood there for a moment, then placed the binder on the fence post. It was labeled Community Archives. Inside were the original HOA bylaws, faded pages of neighborly intentions turned into weapons of control. When they drove off, I carried the binder to the fire pit and tossed it in. The flames licked up the paper fast, curling the edges like dead leaves. That was the last trace of Bay Ridge Shore's authority gone in smoke. Life after the HOA was quieter, though not entirely peaceful. The media kept trying to turn my story into a parable about one man against the system. I ignored them all. I wasn't a symbol. I was just someone who wanted to be left alone. Still, there were ripples. David called one morning with a chuckle in his voice. "You've started a trend, Frank." "Oh." 3 other HOAs across the state are facing audits now. Residents are citing your case as precedent. Lawyers are calling it the Bailey Doctrine. I almost spilled my coffee. "You're kidding." "Dead serious. It means if an HOA tries to annex private land or misuse funds, courts can reference your judgment. Congratulations, your legal folklore." I sighed. Just what I always wanted to be a bedtime story for bureaucrats. He laughed, and for once I did too. A month later, I received one last visitor, Tom Weaver, the whistleblower, who'd first brought me the proof that buried Samantha. He looked better now, cleaner clothes, steadier eyes. He handed me a plain envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $25,000. "The restitution fund," he said. "The court approved payouts to victims. I didn't want to keep mine. You earned it more than I did." I shook my head. "Keep it, Tom. Use it to rebuild." He smiled faintly. "I'm done rebuilding. I'm moving north, somewhere without HOAs." I chuckled. "You'll like the cold. Bureaucrats hate snow." Before he left, he looked around the property one last time. "You know, Bailey, you didn't just win. You exposed the disease under the paint. People like her don't create communities, they consume them." I nodded slowly. "And sometimes the cure has to burn." He drove away without another word. The following morning, I installed my new gate sign, polished steel black lettering that glinted in the sunrise. "Private property. No trespassing, not a member of any HOA trespassers will be photographed, reported, and publicly mocked." I added a small sticker beneath it. "Freedom maintained by concrete and common sense." That one made me smile. The rest of the year passed in peace. I repaired my garden, repainted the porch, and finally fixed the old generator shed. Sometimes on still evenings, I'd walk down to the bayou where the water shimmered like glass. The storms still came, but they didn't scare me anymore. Because this time, when the wind rose, it wasn't carrying lawsuits or lies. It was just weather, honest, inevitable, and temporary. And as the first drops of a new rain began to fall, I stood there with my hands in my pockets, watching it sweep across the empty neighborhood where an empire once stood. No more meetings, no more fines, no more community compliance. Just nature, gravity, and the kind of silence you can only earn after surviving both hurricanes and human arrogance. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal before turning in "Freedom isn't given, it's reinforced." I closed the book, turned off the lights, and listened as the rain tapped against my steel shutters, a lullaby for a man who had finally truly outlasted the storm. It was nearly 3 months after the HOA's official dissolution when I heard the knock. Not the kind that demands entry, but the kind that hesitates 3 light taps and a pause, like someone asking for forgiveness more than permission. When I opened the door, I didn't recognize him at first. The man standing there looked older, leaner, his once expensive shirt wrinkled and his eyes hollow. Then I realized it was Thomas Briggs, the former treasurer who had vanished after testifying. He was holding something in his hands, a small, charred wooden box. "Frank," he said quietly, voice coarse from disuse. "I wasn't sure if I should come back. But this," he lifted the box slightly, "belongs to you now." I stepped aside without a word. He entered slowly, as if afraid my house might judge him too. He set the box on the kitchen table, the same one where David and I had once spread out every scrap of evidence that buried Samantha Stewart and her empire. "What's in it?" I asked. "The original HOA charter," he said. "Found it when they cleared out the old office. It's what started everything, before the greed, before the lies." He slid the lid open. Inside, the paper was scorched and curled, water-stained from the hurricane and the chaos that followed. Across the top, printed in fading ink, was the line, To build a community where neighbors protect one another. The irony cut deep. Thomas gave a small, broken laugh. You know, back then, I actually believed that line. We all did. We thought we were building something better. But somewhere along the way, protecting turned into controlling. Samantha just perfected the corruption we'd already started. He ran a trembling hand through his hair. I signed every fraudulent report she told me to. I convinced good people to hand over their savings because I trusted her. He paused, eyes wet, and I trusted myself too much. I said nothing for a moment. Just listened to the slow tick of the wall clock, the sound of guilt unraveling itself in real time. Finally, I said, "You did the right thing in the end. You came forward." He looked up sharply. "Yeah, after the damage was done, after people lost their homes." His voice cracked, and the guilt poured out like floodwater. "She told me we were helping them, said the storm fund would rebuild the neighborhood faster than FEMA. But every month I watched her transfer money out of the account, and I didn't stop her. I was too scared to lose my job, my house, my place." He laughed bitterly. "You ever realize how small that word sounds once it costs you your soul?" I poured him a glass of bourbon and slid it across the table. "You're not the first person to mistake silence for safety." He took it with shaking hands. "You ever think maybe we deserve the storm?" I looked out the window. The bayou shimmered under a golden afternoon light, calm and indifferent. "No," I said. "But sometimes storms give people the endings they wouldn't have the courage to write themselves." Thomas stared at me It was nearly 3 months after the HOA's official dissolution when I heard the knock. Not the kind that demands entry, but the kind that hesitates 3 light taps and a pause, like someone asking for forgiveness more than permission. When I opened the door, I didn't recognize him at first. The man standing there looked older, leaner, his once expensive shirt wrinkled and his eyes hollow. Then I realized it was Thomas Briggs, the former treasurer who had vanished after testifying. He was holding something in his hands, a small, charred wooden box. "Frank," he said quietly, voice coarse from disuse. "I wasn't sure if I should come back, but this," he lifted the box, "slightly belongs to you now." I stepped aside without a word. He entered slowly, as if afraid my house might judge him too. He set the box on the kitchen table, the same one where David and I had once spread out every scrap of evidence that buried Samantha Stewart and her empire. "What's in it?" I asked. "The original HOA charter," he said. "Found it when they cleared out the old office. It's what started everything, before the greed, before the lies." He slid the lid open. Inside the paper was scorched and curled water stained from the hurricane and the chaos that followed. Across the top, printed in fading ink, was the line, "To build a community where neighbors protect one another." The irony cut deep. Thomas gave a small, broken laugh. "You know, back then I actually believed that line. We all did. We thought we were building something better. But somewhere along the way, protecting turned into controlling. Samantha just perfected the corruption we'd already started." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "I signed every fraudulent report she told me to. I convinced good people to hand over their savings because I trusted her." He paused, eyes wet. "And I trusted myself too much." I said nothing for a moment. Just listened to the slow tick of the wall clock, the sound of guilt unraveling itself in real time. Finally, I said, "You did the right thing in the end. You came forward." He looked up sharply. "Yeah, after the damage was done, after people lost their homes." His voice cracked, and the guilt poured out like floodwater. "She told me we were helping them, said the storm fund would rebuild the neighborhood faster than FEMA. But every month I watched her transfer money out of the account, and I didn't stop her. I was too scared to lose my job, my house, my place." He laughed bitterly. "You ever realize how small that word sounds once it costs you your soul?" I poured him a glass of bourbon and slid it across the table. "You're not the first person to mistake silence for safety." He took it with shaking hands. "You ever think maybe we deserve the storm?" I looked out the window. The bayou shimmered under a golden afternoon light, calm and indifferent. "No," I said. "But sometimes storms give people the endings they wouldn't have the courage to write themselves." Thomas stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I came here to tell you something else, Frank. You weren't the only one on her list." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was a printed map marked with circles in red ink. She called it Phase 4, properties targeted for acquisition after yours. She was planning to expand Bay Ridge shores all the way to the county line, one annexation at a time. Each landowner was labeled either amenable or resistant. I unfolded it on the table. There were 6 other names. 2 of them were families I recognized, people who'd lived quietly along the bayou for generations. She used the storm as leverage, Thomas continued. She was going to force them out under collective safety compliance. You were just the test case. Once she proved she could crush you, the rest would have fallen like dominoes. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. I thought about those families, the farmers, the retirees, the quiet folks who never wanted trouble. People like me. And then I realized my fight hadn't just been about one property. It had been a dam holding back an entire tide of corruption. Thomas must have read it in my face because he smiled weakly. You stopped her, Frank. You saved more than just your land. You saved people who'll never even know your name. I exhaled slowly. I didn't do it for that, I know, he said. That's why it mattered. Later we stepped out to the porch. The sun was low, and the cicadas were starting their evening chorus. He looked out toward the bayou glass still in his hand. You ever think about leaving, he asked. Just selling this place, starting over somewhere that doesn't remind you of all this? I smiled faintly. This house was built to last longer than the people who tried to tear it down. Leaving would mean they still have power over me. He nodded, eyes distant. I wish I had your kind of peace. It's not peace, I said. It's maintenance. He chuckled. You talk like an engineer. 30 years flying planes over the Gulf will do that. You learn that stability isn't natural, it's earned. Every bolt, every brace, every decision matters. Thomas swirled the last of his drink. You think people like Samantha ever understand that? No, I said. Because they think control and stability are the same thing. But they're opposites. He stared at me for a while longer, then stood. I'm heading west. Colorado maybe. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can't hear the word bylaws again. I smiled. You'll like the mountains. Storms come and go fast up there. He nodded. Take care of yourself, Frank. And thank you for reminding me what integrity looks like. He left the wooden box on the porch as he walked away. That night I sat alone by the fire pit. The air smelled of ash and magnolia. I took the box in my hands, studied the faded signatures, the hopeful scrawls of people who once believed in something pure. Then I set it in the fire. The paper curled and blackened smoke rising like a ghost, freed from the weight of its own pretense. I watched until the last ember went dark. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, not anger, not triumph, but release. When the fire died, I went inside and poured another drink. The clock ticked softly, and through the thick walls, I could hear the faint murmur of rain beginning to fall again outside. I looked up at the framed injunction on my wall, my old symbol of defiance, and realized it meant something different now. It wasn't just a reminder of what I'd fought against. It was a monument to what survived when arrogance met consequence. I raised my glass to the quiet, to the storm I said softly, and to everyone it washed clean. The thunder answered from far away like applause carried by the wind. That was the last time I ever saw Thomas Briggs. But sometimes when the rain comes heavy at night and the bayou swells, I think about that burned charter and the men and women who once thought control could build community. They forgot the one rule nature never does: everything built on fear eventually collapses. And me, I just learned to build stronger foundations. The months that followed were quiet. Too quiet almost. Bay Ridge Shores no longer existed, but its ghost lingered in the half-collapsed fences, the empty mailboxes, and the eerie silence of a place that once believed rules could substitute for decency. My own life settled into a rhythm. Mornings spent tending to my garden. Afternoons repairing the storm shutters I didn't need anymore but kept out of habit. Evenings on the porch with a glass of bourbon and the cicadas singing their slow Louisiana hymns. Then one late afternoon, a stranger came walking up the gravel road. She was